Maybe there's a couple other data points around your company, your brand, what you promise, and then they go look at the price, and they're going to triangulate those things with each other and go, do all those pieces go together? Does that make sense to me? What's the value for the price that I'm getting? And there's a whole set of decision-making that goes on there. So I just think price is the most important one.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Hartman, and on this show, we deliver ideas and insights from leaders across the country every single week to help you lead more effectively. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, there's a lot of really smart people in the construction industry, but what happens to the people that are really smart that are outside of the industry? No fear, my friend. I bring them in. We go find them where they are, and we bring them in to this construction industry so we can talk to them. And that's what we're going to do here in my conversation with Mr. Todd Sattersten. But first, I'd like to thank our friends at Capital One Trade Credit. If you're interested in increasing top-line revenue while increasing cash flow, while decreasing risk, you're going to want to check out Capital One Trade Credit. Now, how might you do such a thing? You can Google Capital One Trade Credit. Now, I have come across the name Todd Sattersten, and he had a book that I found extremely helpful at the beginning of the pandemic as we were thinking about different ways to launch a book and have it find its audience faster. And that book was called Every Book is a Startup, a Better Way for Authors to Publish Their Work. And as someone who has built a startup, there was lots of different ways I think that resonated for me, and I found that extremely helpful. But I knew Todd well before that because one of my most gifted books is called The 100 Best Business Books of All Time, What They Say, Why They Matter, and How They Can Help You. So Todd currently runs his own company. It's called Bard Press, B-A-R-D, and they publish 1 or 2 books a year, focusing on helping authors bring their best work to the widest audience of readers possible. On his LinkedIn homepage, Todd says, I have 15 years in book publishing, and I have the unique experience of being involved in almost every part of the industry, including author, literary agent, editor, publisher, audiobook producer, marketer, bookseller, and in subsidiary rights. And while you might be thinking, I don't know anything about those things, if you are in construction, you will understand that what he's doing is bringing diverse types of talent together to work on a project. From a very high level, we're all doing the same thing. And for many of you readers who have been around a while, you may recognize Todd's position as president of 1-800-CEO Read. Anyway, in this conversation, we start talking about a very short white paper of sorts that he wrote called Fixed to Flexible. I make this mandatory reading for folks in our OSR Academy, and it's something that I read every single year. It's about value, it's about price, and it's about positioning. So every single person should go find this. It's free. We're going to link to it in the show notes. Go download and read it. You can burn through it in, probably 20 minutes or so. It is not deep, but I think understanding the fundamentals of what he's talking about here, again, value, price, and positioning, are so important to companies driving revenue and, more importantly, profitability. So we talk about that, and then I take the opportunity to describe 3 individuals, give them a little context because these are people who are in my orbit. I describe them, and I ask Todd on the spot to recommend a book or 2 to these individuals and explain why. So that was a lot of fun. I put him on the spot. Anyway, I could continue to gush about Todd Sattersten, but I think a better idea would be for me to shut my mouth and get going with the episode. So I will do that right now. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Todd Sattersten, CEO and president of Bard Press. As always, thank you for listening. Mr. Todd Sattersten, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bradley. This is great.
Yes, well, just by looking at your background and knowing your background, this is very exciting because this gets us a chance to talk about publishing, about books, about business, about the Midwest, all things that I love talking about. So appreciate you making time here. Let's start kind of back at the beginning, understanding where you ended up in the publishing world. Take me back to a 12-year-old Todd. Tell me, where were you geographically? And at that point in time, what did that Todd think he was going to be when we arrive here at present day?
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, kind of in between Milwaukee and Chicago. And I would say that as a 12-year-old, me and my brother ran a 22-house landscaping business. So we were kind of entrepreneurial. We were, kind of edged on by our parents. My father was an entrepreneur. He ran a sheet metal fabrication shop. My mom was an accountant at a small manufacturing plant. So lots of entrepreneurship, lots of thinking about business from like a very early age.
Sure.
And being around that much manufacturing, when I went to school, I went to school for mechanical engineering, and leaving there, got a job at GE in manufacturing operations. So that was kind of the start. So that was sort of the first arc for what I was involved in.
Dude, that is fascinating. So 12 years old, 22 houses.
Yeah.
I mean, is this all a cash business? Were you guys paying taxes? How did that seems extremely daunting for that age. I had my house and I had like 3 other houses in the neighborhood. I think it was, $7.50 or $10 a piece. And I thought I was living large. You guys had a real operation there.
We were really lucky. It was really where we lived is what mattered. The top of the subdivision I lived in were permanent year-round residents. And what happened is, as you went further down into the neighborhood, it changed from permanent residents to vacation residents, people who come up from Chicago for the weekend. And we lived just not far from a lake, about a half mile from a lake. So the further I got down, the further it was people who were just weekend folks. And those were exactly the kind of folks who were more than happy to have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old mow their lawns, have it done on a Thursday afternoon, so that when they showed up on Friday afternoon, the place looked great and they could enjoy their weekend. So great felt need.
Yes.
A good, good mugs here at the 12-year-old age of and we literally put signs on people's doors saying, "You're looking for someone to mow your lawn? We can help you." We owned a riding lawnmower. We had a trailer that had 3 push mowers. We had a whole thing. And so Wednesday into Thursday, every week, that was our gig.
That's really cool. Wow. We'll certainly kind of tie that back to your entrepreneurial spirit and how that all ties in. All right. So you ended up at Michigan Tech. I have to ask, mascot, Michigan Tech?
Huskies.
The Huskies.
The Huskies.
All right.
Yeah.
Way up there in darn near Canada.
Darn near.
You got out, you entered into GE. So, and that era of GE, while obviously still the brand and the reputation is incredible, that is, in my mind, at least, kind of something like kind of the halcyon days for really just manufacturing and running a company. I'm not sure. Was that a little bit before or during kind of Jack Welch's kind of leadership? Is that a little bit before that?
It's the end of his tenure. It's the end of his tenure. Okay. It was the end of his tenure. Jack took over in 82.
Okay.
And I think he had the job till 2001. And Jeff Immelt was his successor. So I was there kind of in prime Jack Welch, prime GE time. Would not have traded the 7 years I spent there for anything, really.
Yeah, because you're right. But I think at that point too, he became a legend. He was
larger than life.
He was famous, real person famous, non-business nerds, knew who he was. Are there any key principles or lessons or stories that you really gathered during your time at GE that you said, those continue to echo in what you're doing here today?
I mean, I think one thing GE did a really good job of was, my experience was, I didn't work in the business like I was a single sort of individual. Anytime you were working on something, you were working on the broader business problem. So you knew the numbers, whether it was what's going on with revenues, what's going on with the expenses. I was there during the Six Sigma time. During Six Sigma, when the sort of black belts and master black belts and all this kind of fancy, the whole quality program that was adopted from Motorola was taking place. So I always appreciated again, it's probably my engineering background, but there was so much that was based in quantifiable work. Like, let's not just guess at what's going to work. Let's measure it. Let's analyze it. Let's improve it. Let's control it. That's sort of the arc of, what Six Sigma was. And I don't think that just applied to improving the quality of light bulbs, but it was also, it was thinking about what impact would this have on the business, because that's the whole point of us being here. So learning that and being able to bring that with me, I think through the rest of my career has been really important.
Yeah, that phrase you just said there really stands out to me. What is the broader business problem? And I think, well, as a business owner myself, I think sometimes it's easy to kind of get really sucked down into the weeds and distance yourself from saying, what are we actually trying to do here? Yeah. What's the ideal solution? How can we best help this group of customers? And I think for a lot of folks in our audience too, it's sometimes the minutia and some of the details of what we deal with kind of just really cover up and obscure kind of that idea of the broader business problem. And I think constantly keeping that front and center is, what is the broader business problem we're trying to solve here? I think can be really valuable. So I'm going to take a hard right turn here if you're good with that. You know where we're going here. You had written something, maybe you can give me just a little of the background. Probably, I'm guessing, you can tell me if I'm totally wrong. I stumbled across your paper, Fixed to Flexible. I believe for me, this was probably 2009. Is that possible?
It would have been 2009, 2010. Yep.
Okay. All right. And I immediately read it. And for a number of different reasons, it kind of blew my hair back. The copy that I have is all marked up. I believe it's the original copy I have from way back then. We have an OSR Academy, Outside Sales Rep Academy, where we're helping salespeople to deliver value and think differently and be different, and to help people. This is part of the required reading, because I think you do such a nice job of talking about pricing and profitability and variable costs. And maybe we'll just start, maybe give me a little background. What led you to write this, and maybe explain for folks that don't know, which most don't, what was the distribution model and how did you share this with the world, and how did it end up in my hands?
Yeah. Well, it was a paper written for the time, first of all. And what I mean by that is, the web really happened in kind of 2000, when we were really like on the web and in a browser. And I'm starting to, depending on the age of your audience here, I start to sound old, but, by 2010, we were 10 years into like kind of what the internet was going to do to things. And I think we take so much of it for granted, but the flexibility of what the internet allowed us to do, whether it came to how I priced something, how I distributed something, what the structure of the product of this itself was, like we still see this playing out. Like if we see what's happening in streaming, like if we see what, the way HBO is fighting with Disney, is fighting with Hulu, is fighting with and some of them own each other. And, it's nuts. Apple. So we're still seeing this fixed to flexible kind of argument being played out. And the reason I call it fixed to flexible is pricing classically is thought, I'm going to pay this amount for this thing, and there's no way around it. In my world of book publishing, there was a price printed on the book. The retail price is $26.99. That was what it was going to be sold to you for dozens of years, hundreds of years, probably not hundreds of years, but, probably the last 50 years prior to Amazon showing up. No one thought that you would even think of giving up part of that retail price, giving up part of your margin and giving it back to the customer, unless it was a brand new release and you wanted to make some sort of special deal. So this thought around pricing being a fixed, cannot change, there's only one option to, the internet was allowing for all sorts of things, all sorts of ways that price could be considered an entirely flexible. I could offer multiple prices, not only to multiple people. Like I might say, today it's this, tomorrow it's that. The next day it might be something else, all depending on what's going on in all sorts of other circumstances. So I think the moment that you start to think that price is not just this fixed, non-changing item, and you think there's lots of ways that I might better address my customers by, frankly, giving a much wider range of pricing, I think you get into a very interesting discussion. So there was just so much going on during that time. And there were so many good examples to be able to draw from that it made for a really easy paper, frankly, to put together. Because at the same time, you had all this behavioral science coming into the mainstream with Dan Ariely and Kahneman and Tversky. And you had all these people who were telling us more about ourselves and how we make decisions than I think we knew prior to that. So there was a whole conflux of things that led to that.
Yeah. And I think that the Freakonomics books kind of blew up somewhere, maybe around there a little bit. And we started kind of just looking at things with a different lens. And I think for our audience I won't go into a full digression, but for the better part of the last 75 years, call it, commodities in lumber and panels have been fairly consistent. And then we saw incredible volatility and continue to see volatility over the last couple of years. So traditionally, in my background as a builder, the buyers really had all of that power. Maybe not all of it, the vast majority of it, and only in certain markets would that change. And then we saw this pendulum totally shift. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh, okay, well, it's volatile. The price is going up and down. So what do we charge today? All of a sudden became this really, I think to your point, this flexible argument. And my argument to kind of our listeners is we should be constantly thinking about pricing and the different ways we can deliver value at different times, different quantities. So anyway, I'm going to run my mouth too much here. Let me ask you this. When you say price is a signal, Todd, what do you mean by that?
I think that there's no other indicator that communicates more information to a customer than price. Because independent of whatever product or service that someone's buying, unless they're completely brand new to the space and they're just learning it, they already have a very good idea of what the price landscape looks like for the product or service that they're buying. Mm-hmm. So you're signaling to them all sorts of information about where you choose to set that price. And the signal that you're sending, it's just so important, because the next thing they're going to do is, after they see price, and maybe it's not the first thing they see, maybe there's a couple other data points around your company, your brand, what you promise, and then they go look at the price, and they're going to triangulate those things with each other and go, do all those pieces go together? Does that make sense to me? What's the value for the price that I'm getting? And there's a whole set of decision-making that goes on there. So I just think price is the most important one.
Yeah. Maybe let's use an example from book publishing that's in your wheelhouse here. And I will occasionally use this metaphor or kind of analogy, if you will. But maybe just rewind the clock a little bit. We're all familiar with the Harry Potter series at this point, but do you, and I realize I'm dating your material a little bit. But say the seventh book or whatever the hell it was, the sixth book or the fifth book, there was different versions, and you could buy it in hardcover the day it came back. And maybe it was, I don't know, $25, $30. That there was this ultra premium leather bound, that literally smelled like elves and witches and whatever. And that was like $150. Maybe walk us through that, just that model and how it was done and why there was value in that, even if only a really small percentage of the population invested in that higher end product. Yeah.
I mean, I think, like, if I generalize that example just a little bit, people will really recognize this model. Most books, not all books, but the vast majority of popular books, when they come out, they're a hardcover version. And we're used to that. We're used to the hardcover with the dust jacket, and we're used to paying $25 to $35 for that book, right? And if we want that book, when it comes out, when it's released, we are willing to pay that price, right? Now, what's not unusual is that a year or 2 years later, and particularly for very popular books, that book gets released as a paperback, right? So you're not still paying $25 to $35 for that paperback. Chances are you're going to pay $16 to maybe $20 for that paperback. Different construction. So if we think back to our, if we're a producer of some sort or another,
sure,
certainly costs me more to make the hardcover. I got to print the dust jacket. I've got these heavy cardboard inserts that are going into the binding process. When I make a paperback, I'm just wrapping it in a thick piece of paper. Mm-hmm. So my costs go down when I make that paperback. But I will tell you that the premium that somebody gets as a publisher for that hardcover over the cost differential between the hardcover and the paperback is I make more money on the hardcover. So as a publisher in my space who loves doing business books, I like keeping my books in hardcover as long as I can because I make more money. Mm-hmm. But there are points where it does make sense for me to release a paperback edition because there may be another price point there where somebody might step in and go, it would be a lot easier for me to actually spend $17 than it is for me to spend $27. And you could open up a whole new market. Mm-hmm. Now, I could argue that ebooks fit somewhere into that space as well. Yeah. I think sometimes people are making decisions on ebooks, sometimes around price, sometimes around convenience. I could have it right now. I could put audiobooks next to this. Audiobooks almost push this in a complete other direction, which is most audiobooks are bought through subscription. You don't even buy the book as a unit, as a thing. You pay $19.99 a month to listen to as many audiobooks as you want, or maybe you get a 2 or 3 rentals. So even within a book in the publishing ecosystem, mm-hmm. there are many different ways that I can interact with that book, how fast I get it, how much I might pay for it. And in your example, we also sometimes see that there's premium editions to the book. It's not $27. It's $47. Yeah. Like the Harry Potter example, I think is a really great example. I know people that own every set, and they're either on the 3rd or 4th set of completely redone Harry Potter books because those were so important to them when they were growing up. They're such fans of those books. Are they going to read every one of those? No, of course not. But they want to put them on your shelf or they want to put them on my shelf. Yep. As we're recording this, Taylor Swift just released her new album, Midnights. She did an album. I mean, literally LP vinyl. Yes. That is selling through the roof. And so what could I do? I could go listen to it on Spotify that I'm paying my $9.99 for, that I'm sharing with my entire family. Or do I want that experience of owning the vinyl and actually listening to it on a turntable? I think those are 2 really great examples that are really easy to think through. Now, I think it could get really hard where you're like, well, gosh, what could that mean in my industry? But I think every industry, there's possibilities to think about both. In both those cases, we're talking about both price and we're both thinking about the product and we're thinking about distribution.
Yeah. And to kind of land this a little bit to our audience is why I'm fascinated about this is, number one, loving the topic we're talking about. But we had an instance with a client who had a really high-end builder, super premium builder. But he lived several hours away. And he said, here's the deal. I'm going to come out here probably once a week. I'm going to be here in the afternoon and I need to accomplish a lot in a really short amount of time. And if we're short on this, or I need that, or I have questions on this, I don't have time to wait. Like I need to get back home and I don't want to come up here more often and it's getting frustrating. And he said, could you create a pricing model for me where when I'm here on these dates, I'll let you know when I'm coming. As far as I'm concerned, everyone in that store knows I'm here. And if I call, you're going to drop everything. And that might mean you need to bring out a truck with some fasteners and some sheets of plywood and some roofing. And I'm going to expect you here in 45 minutes. You know, my client was in kind of a very humorous way, was explaining like this guy wants the moon. And I said, thinking of this, let's be creative. There's a price for that. Well, I mean, we could literally shut down the entire store and only focus on that. What's the cost of that, right? But what I want people to think about is these aren't just books. It's not just music. It's everything we do. And maybe there's only one builder like that in town. And maybe he's willing to pay 175% for it. But if you kind of create that super premium market there, maybe there's other people like that, right? And there's maybe other ones that have a lower cost to serve. And ultimately, I think that's what we're talking about, the fixed cost, the cost to serve. And I think it's something that our industry really needs to understand. And we're really interacting with a lot of these different models in different ways. So I appreciate you kind of going down that rabbit hole with me.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing really quickly there, Bradley. I think that we think when we hear these examples from the consumer space that it's just collectible or it's just emotional. It sounds to me like in that example you just gave, that builder has some very specific emotions, some very specific felt needs that he wants solved. The closer we get to knowing what those needs are for him, what he's trying to solve, the better we can build offerings that match what that is. A business transaction is still a person-to-person transaction.
Correct.
Like I don't know why people even distinguish between the two. Yes, maybe I'll bet you this builder is practically spending their own money. Like, so that really matters to them.
Yeah.
And, is it because they want to keep that building site moving? Is it because, that one trip for them, all that stuff getting delivered keeps them on schedule, keeps everybody on site, the project gets done faster? That may not matter at all to somebody who's just thinking, I've got materials in a lot, but you completely change your point of view on that piece. And there's a whole different set of offerings that I think gets created out of that space.
Yeah. And I think in this case too, I think this guy's a multimillionaire. He doesn't need to do this, but he knows how valuable his time is. And I think he gets white glove treatment most other places he goes. And he knows what he's getting here is a white glove treatment. This is I'll get to you, in 24 hours if you call in by 10 o'clock in the morning treatment. And he's like, I'm willing to pay for it. Tell me, what is it, And I think the subscription model, and then we'll carry on. Otherwise, you and I this is going to be a 7-hour podcast, Todd, is there's a countertop manufacturer I'm friends with, and we're going to have them on the show here in a bit. They have a very profitable, it is still relatively small, but it's growing quickly, subscription model as a countertop manufacturer. And some folks, kind of why I want them to tell their story and have them on the pod, they're like, what? Like, how does that even work? I'm like, we got some creative guys. They're thinking about this. Our web development firm, they built our new website, and they said, by the way, we have basically a maintenance/insurance program. You pay $60 a month. And if you ever need us on these small type things, it's a subscription model and you pay us. If you use it, great. If not, you lose it. And I said, yeah, I'm in. I know we're going to need it. I don't know when. And so I just think, again, to your point, these are not limited to just selling Beanie Babies and hardcover business books and stuff like that. It's everywhere. And that's where I want to give a plug. One is Priceless by William Poundstone, which I really enjoyed. It was great. And this other one, The 1% Windfall by Rafi Mohammed. Both of these as a 1-2 punch. You mentioned them in Fixed to Flexible. I was like, all right, if Todd tells me to buy them, I'm buying them.
Poundstone's great because it's a narrative.
Yeah.
They're just really good stories, and there's good history. And Rafi is like, it's tactical. It's quick it's more your traditional business book where it's like, here's how you should think about this. And, the famous, the 1% windfall, where that comes from. And this is, I think, super important for people listening. McKinsey's studies show that a 1% move in your price increases profitability between 10 and 15%.
Yeah.
1% in price. 1%. Like, we're not asking you to raise your prices 20% or 10%. 1% moves the profit number 10 to 15. I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
So his whole book is about that piece and how you do it.
That 1%. Yeah. The 1% moving the price kind of covers up, and it can cover up a lot of other sins that are within a business. But if you're pricing well and you're continuing to push that, absolutely. So let's transition here. I sent you some questions. There are several folks, I guarantee you they're listening. In some ways, we're helping them just kind of think through the way as kind of friends, and I would say in my case, admirers of their intellect and the stories that they share. In other cases, we have some friends that are actively writing. They have a plan to finish up, June of 2023 with a book. I realize there's a whole series of books on this. I realize you've written a book on this, how to think about this. We don't have that much time. If we have listeners who are thinking, whether they're 30, whether they're 50, whether they're 75, say, I've got some stories to tell. I have the itch. I think I want to write a book and to kind of share my stories. How would you advise them to begin the thought process to even determine if that's a fit for them? And I'll quit rambling. I'll just leave it at that question. What's the first pieces of advice you might have for them?
The first piece of advice I would give them is figure out who the book's for. And what I mean is, are you writing the book for yourself or are you writing the book for someone else? There's a lot of people who want to write books, but they really want to kind of write them for themselves in some ways. They want to record kind of the history and they think they have something to share. And that desire resonates with me. But when it's only written from that perspective, it's only written from, hey, I've got all these things to share with you. Sometimes, and this goes back to just what we were just talking about a minute ago, sometimes we might miss a potential reader and how that we might help them. So that's usually the first piece that I ask people to get really clear on. Is this for you or is this for someone else? And it's for someone else. Then there's a whole set of questions that come from that. Who's it for? What does that reader look like? And what promise do you want to make to them when you start the book? What's the promise? And usually good books, when you read the first introduction, maybe the first chapter, you'll find a sentence that will represent the promise that author's making to you. So that's the first thing I would say is get clear on why you want to do it. Is this a biography project for yourself, an autobiography project? Or is this, hey, I really believe this is something bigger. So then bring that point of view to it being able to help other people. I think the second thing I'd say is writing books is hard. And I don't say that lightly. And what I mean is I'm working on a book right now. It's taken 2 years and it's probably going to take another year. And that's me sitting down most mornings for 60 to 120 minutes and doing the work. So I would say if you want to be an author, you got to probably like to write, and and if it's like, well, I want to write a book, but you can't build that habit of wanting to be in front of the typewriter. Again, probably going to be hard.
Yep.
And then I just think the third piece is, what are your overall goals for the book? It ties back to the first question, but it's a little bit more broader. Some people are like, I want to be published. Okay, well then learn that process. Learn how commercial publishing works. Learn what it is that publishers are looking for. Learn the industry. My experience normally here, my experience and my advice is take books off your shelf that you really like and go to the acknowledgments. Go look for the editors who did the books. Go look for the agents who did the books. And build some knowledge about that ecosystem of the people that are involved in that and start to find out how that works. If you have authors that, I know just about everybody I know has an author in their ecosystem or a couple, go talk to them. What was it like? What was the pitfalls? What went well? What could you learn from? Publishing it's like any industry. The more you can learn about it, the probably more successful you'll be and the happier you'll be once you get the book out.
Yeah, and that has me rethinking about what you said earlier, like what's the broader business problem? And if I put myself in a publisher or an agent to authors, or like what problem are they trying to solve? How do they go about it? But I want to ask you specifically about that first question. I imagine for a few of my friends who are going down this process or thinking about a book is the risk of self-deception at the question of who's this for? If I said that to them, I'm like, well, of course, it's for the world. It's a gift. I want to help them. I've stories to tell and I want to share them. And then for one person in mind, I'm like, maybe, but this is for you. I can tell you that this is for you, and that's okay. Right?
It's okay.
Are there maybe any other secondary questions you could follow up with if someone is, maybe their wife or husband or someone is pushing back and you're like, I listened to Todd's question. The first one is definitely for you. And they're like, no, it isn't. Are there any follow-up questions or ways that we might be able to suss that out a little bit more? Because to your point, number one rule, it's not about you. It's about your audience. Do you know your audience? And how are we being honest with ourselves, which, I empathize with. Is no easy task. And I look back at, quite frankly, first book or two that I wrote. Yeah, it was all about me. It was only me. It was that me just, gushing out, telling all these stories I wanted to tell.
I mean, I think my answer normally to that is books are a product. And so I usually ask people, have you had any experience developing products? A lot of people, almost all of us, have been in a situation one way or another, internally or externally. We're in a service relationship, right? If I work in a big organization, I'm doing something to help somebody and my work is then going to help somebody else down the chain. So everyone knows service. Everyone knows that side of it. But when you ask people, have you been a part of a product development in any place or service development, frankly, so I think to myself, sales, I think to myself, marketing, I think to myself, product management, entrepreneurship. Have you started a company to try to put a new product or service out into the world? Those sets of experiences can be hugely valuable in helping you create a book. So do you have some sense for what it is to make a product and to make a product for someone else? The two things I think about when I'm trying to make products are how strong is the felt need for the product? As in, will someone go out of their way to go buy the book? Will they cross the street, walk into the Barnes & Noble or the indie in their town and say, I'm looking for this book. I heard about it. It sounds great. So felt need is super important. Stronger the felt need for someone else, not for you, for someone else, the more successful that book's going to be. And then the other thing I think about is audience. How big is the audience for the book? And I say that because the reason that these two pieces, the felt need and the audience size, frankly, connect back with each other back to the product question is, like any product, you're making a lot of decisions about how you make it. What's the title? What's the subtitle? What does the cover look like? If I open it up to the table of contents, what are the chapters about? What's the book description say about it? We go back to signals. How much does it cost for me to buy it? You're sending a lot of signals to that buyer, to that potential reader about this book. And so how you frame the book. Is this a book for salespeople that work in the construction industry, or is this a sales book for someone who's starting sales for the first time? This is their first job. Or is this sales for sales sake? Those are three really different books. And there's probably a lot of people who could probably write all three of those books. That would be my bet. So which is the one that fits best with your interest, the audience, what you're trying to do, what the long-term goal is for the book? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remembered one of the books, I'm blanking on the title, but it's the book we're talking about. You wrote a book about writing books and how we think about it. You kept on coming back to the importance of the felt need, right? And for me being a little bit slow, I like thinking of this being very tangible. I was thinking of like the fabric felt, and I was like, is the need so tangible that it's like felt? And so for me, it kind of had that dual meaning that I found really helpful. And I'm like, is the need so obvious that you can literally touch it and feel it? And I love that. And I think I've used it in some of our training with younger salespeople about, but to your point, again, if you don't understand the broader business problem, if that felt need isn't that high, then yeah, they're probably going to compete on price. And then we're just kind of, right?
Yes.
We're sloshing around with everybody else, right?
Yes. If you don't, whether it's a book that we're talking about or whether it goes back to our broader discussion earlier, if you don't understand what the end reason is why the customer is buying from you, like what that really is it you're the closest? Is it you pick up the phone the fastest? Is it the products are always available? You have everything I need? Is it I'm lazy and I've worked with you for 20 years? No, maybe lazy is not the right word. I've worked with you for 20 years. That's why I keep coming back. Those are all really different felt needs.
Yeah.
And if that person's been coming for 20 years, do you have a program that recognizes people who've been customers for 20 years and are their name on the wall? Like, so every time they come in, hey, our 20-year customer, so-and-so, again, we could spiral off into the sales and marketing opportunities that come with that. But once you understand that felt need, it makes you both, I think, a better business person, but it also makes you a better author to get your book published. So kind of tying those two pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll finish with a quick anecdote and then we'll switch to kind of the last couple of questions we've got. But I have a really good client. They've been in business for over 100 years. And I asked that question. I said, we were talking about pricing. We were talking about service model and these sorts of things, cost to serve. And I said, named their best customer. I said, why does he buy from you? And he said, and I appreciated the candor. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't know. He's like, I don't know. I don't know why it is. Closest, fastest available. And I said, having known you for a while, understand your brand, your culture, I have some ideas. Those are irrelevant. Here's what I encourage you to do. I encourage you to blame me. Say you're working with a consultant who's forcing you to do this. Call him up and say, I'm going to be really vulnerable here. Please don't shove it back in my face. Honestly, why are you buying from us? And he said he did that, to his credit. And he said the guy came back and said some of the nicest things any customer's ever said. And we've been working with this guy for 20 years, and he's never said that to us. And I said, we need to take that, have more of those conversations, and just listen to them. Because sometimes we don't know. We're busting our tail. We're doing what we do to try to help people, but we don't really know. And at a certain point, in this case, he was almost afraid to ask. Afterwards, I said, do you think your relationship is better served? Is it deeper now because of that? And he says, 100%. And he's like, we just really thanked him. And so anyway, to your point, whether it's books, whether it's lumber, whatever it is, service, product, ultimately it's about, are we really listening to, and do we understand the value and the felt need we have?
Brad, I got to add one more piece to that.
Please.
What's magical about those conversations is that if you do them right, and here's what I mean by that. If you ask the question exactly the way you described, and then you listen to what they say, and the challenge here isn't to quickly translate it into the language that you think they're saying, but really listen to the actual words that they're using. What are their actual sentiments? How are they describing what it is that you do? I would argue it has the potential to change your business. It may change how you market your business. It could be that they start using a different word or a different phrase for a thing that you've done for 20 years, but they say it in a better way, in a way that when they talk to someone else about you, that's what they're saying. And so to me, I always see those opportunities when I'm talking to a customer and I say, hey, why did you work with me? Or what's it been like to work with me? That when they go tell, in my case, as a book publisher, when they go tell another author, those are the words they're going to use. The opportunity for me is to take that same language and use it in my marketing and sales pitches to say, hey, at Bard Press, we're this. And so I think those conversations are magical for all the reasons you said, and that you have the opportunity to mine these wonderful nuggets about your business that can improve your sales and marketing in ways you may not realize.
No, that's so well said. I'm glad you kind of put an exclamation mark on that. All right, let's bring her home. So I have 3, we'll call them personas, when in fact, these are real persons. They are adequately named to disguise gender. Chris, Terry, and Sam. I'm going to read 3 of these personas, give you a little detail about them. And you wrote the book. This is one of my most gifted books. I love it. The 100 best business books of all time. I'm going to give you kind of some details about 3 different people. And then maybe just quickly you can give, I promise I won't nerd out and go deep on the titles you give me. Otherwise we'll be here for another hour and a half. So here we go. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. First one is Chris. Chris is 30 years old. He's got a background in sales. He does read quite a bit, which is not the case for all of these folks. So if you're listening now and you're like, I'm not a big reader, do not shut this off. We're coming back to you. He has a recent promotion to VP, vice president at a distribution company. He needs to develop a unique strategy to differentiate the firm and enter new markets. He hopes to differentiate through generating consistent business insights versus competing on price. Now, there's a lot you don't know about this individual, but you do know that any sort of books come to mind that you would recommend this individual read?
The first book I would recommend is, this sounds like it's a big role that he's taken on, or sorry, we don't know gender, they have taken on.
Right.
The first book I would tell them to read is The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. And the reason I say that is because Michael makes a really good point. He says presidents get 100 days to make their first impression. We track it. We hear about it. We go, what did they do in their first 100 days? He says in business, you get 90. You don't even get all 100 days.
Right.
But the point that he makes is that we're only going to make really big career transitions a few times in our career. Like we're only going to do that 4 or 5 times. And those transitions need to have high levels of success associated with them. And if that's the case, we should really study how to be successful in those transitions. And he lays out a wonderful framework and roadmap for exactly the things you should do in those first 90 days. So even if it's been 180 days or 270 days, I would still recommend this book to Chris, because there might be things in there of like, oh, you know what? Maybe I haven't done enough of that kind of cross team. Have I talked to everybody and had really deep conversations about, how my role interacts with their role and how I want to help us be both successful and create win-win opportunities? That's the first one I would think of. The second one I would go to is I would go to Reese and Trout, Al Reese and Jack Trout. And you could pick one of two books. If you want the simple version, you could go read the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. It's a paperback that's about, 120 pages.
125?
If you're listening, my fingers are very close to each other. If you're watching, you'll know what I mean.
Right.
It is the short version of a much longer book they wrote called Positioning. The book came out in the 80s, and it is the best book I've ever read on how do you build a unique selling proposition for your book that allows you to look differently. And these examples, like Volvo is still known for safety. Right? We know that Apple is known for quality. We can look at iconic products in the marketplace and immediately be able to connect with the brand attribute that matters to that. And that brand attribute was deliberately created by that person.
Right.
So thinking really hard about, do I want to be the easiest? Do I want to be the most bespoke? Do I want to have the widest selection? And we hear this all the time in marketing. There's people clearly trying to mark out their space to be like, do I fit into this? Am I a customer that works within this thing? Positioning. So for Bard Press, for example, we only publish one book a year. So if I'm talking to an author, and I talk to a lot of authors, and I say, listen, I only work on one book a year. And that means for the next 12 months, if you work with me, we're only going to work on your book. And I'm going to give you all of my effort and focus on a successful creation and concept development of your book, but also a launch of your book. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
No one else in the marketplace could say that. So what's your version of that? So if I'm the new distribution guy, I would want to figure out what's the thing that I could figure out. Now, maybe I'm not the marketing and sales guy. I'm the VP of distribution. I have a very particular role, but can I help shape that and go have conversations with marketing and sales? Just get smarter about how to be more successful. Does that make sense?
100%. All right, here's Terry. Terry's the person that I'm nudging along. So hopefully you can help me carry some water on this one. He, you don't know. Nobody knows.
I have no idea.
You have no idea. Terry's 61. He's the business owner of a $30 million business. He reads some, okay? Doubled his business within the last 3 years, struggling with time management, and spends too little time engaging in leadership activities versus low-value managerial work that someone else should be doing. He's got children entering the business. They've got new ideas. He or she, you don't know, is not quite ready for them. And the speed of the business growth, I would say, has greatly exceeded his or her capability to manage it, and he feels very overwhelmed. This individual, Terry, what books should this individual read?
So I'm going to make a guess with Terry, and I'm going to guess that Terry does not get to that level of success actually having a problem with productivity.
100%. And I would argue this, right? His productivity and work ethic and grind and hustle is at this point more of a liability than an asset.
Right. But I would argue that no matter what age, we always have a problem with focus and priority. My guess is that I don't think their business grew on accident. So I would probably follow up saying, hey, well, how did that happen? What did you do? What did you do in that space? And what problem is that causing for you now? I would point to one of our books, actually. I would point to The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And the reason I say that is because in hearing exactly that story, Gary tells a story. Gary's the CEO and chairman and founder of Keller Williams, the largest real estate company in the world.
Sure.
And Gary tells a story in the book about various points in his career as a leader and getting through those transition points, really business transition points in this example, right? And that to get to those next points always required an enormous amount of focus and priority. And that when more, like you grow that much, I can't imagine how many opportunities new opportunities are sitting in front of you. That gets to be a dangerous time, I think, for a lot of people, because if you start to deviate from that thing that's been working for you and you want to pick every fruit off the tree, I think there's opportunity to get in trouble. So what's great about the one thing is it's one question. And the one question is, what's your one thing today? And that everybody's like, oh, that's the stupidest question ever. No, The question I would ask people is there one thing you're going to do today? And did you accomplish it? And most days we actually didn't accomplish the most important thing we needed to do today. And that's ridiculous. In the real estate industry, what they say is that you need to make 20 contacts every day if you want to have a successful practice. Doesn't matter if you're starting out, doesn't matter if you've been in the industry 15 years. So that's always the one thing. And you could apply that to sales if you wanted, but in real estate, they're very specific about it. So the question I would ask to Terry would be, what's your one thing? Can you get a little bit more focused and a little less harried probably around all this stuff? And I'll bet you that's going to make Terry both even more productive and less harried, less hectic, probably feeling better about what's going on. I know you gave me the little hey, the kids are showing up and they want to muck with things a touch. The book I would recommend for that piece, because I do think it's an important conversation, because I think it can quickly take success like that and push it off to the right if you get too many people in key roles who frankly aren't aligned. Mm-hmm. The book that I think is really good for this is actually a book called The Partnership Charter by David Gage.
Huh. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I think it's hiding in the 100 Best, Bradley, so you can check out a quick review of it in there. But the gist of the book is this, that we're not ever really taught how to be good business partners with other people. And unless we create very specific intentionality about how we want things to work, but more importantly, the eventualities, what happens if, because it's going to, but God forbid it happens tomorrow, what happens if Terry dies? What's the intention for everybody? What happens if you give a piece of ownership to one of the children and they get divorced? It turns out that business partnerships actually, frankly, are more complicated in many cases than marriages and partnerships, because there's so many people that are affected by a delusion or a lack of alignment between things. So what's really great about what Gage does in Partnership Charter is he says, why aren't business people taught about partnerships? Why aren't lawyers taught about partnerships? Why aren't doctors taught about partnerships? Because that's probably the business relationship that you're going to be in. It's not just going to be you. It's going to be a set of people. So he walks through a really deliberate process around how you build a plan, a charter for your business, not the illegal agreement, really an intentionality agreement outside of that says, hey, listen, here's how we think all this is going to work. And if this happens, this is kind of what we want. What happens if somebody shows up and wants to pay Terry $100 million for his business? What do you do then? Are we going to sell, or are we going to try to ride the growth curve up further?
Yeah.
Having those conversations, crazy important. So Gage in Partnership Charter does a really great job of laying that out.
Well, I know some other people besides Terry. I think they're okay in that category. Several other people that are listening will absolutely, you will have touched a nerve there, because there's a lot of succession planning or lack of succession planning, or 70% succession planning, and then it dialed back to 50%, and we're going in reverse, and everyone's living longer and they want to stay in the business because they're so profitable. So, yeah, I'm thrilled you threw that in there. And quite frankly, we are very actively trying to collaborate more as we grow our business. And as a guy who kind of started on my own and had been doing my own thing for a long time, my own way, I think the timing's right for that. So that's wonderful. By the way, hat tip on the one thing. I do believe Eric, the producer, who will be producing this episode, he came in the other day and he said, you have the one things, because it's got the one I have as the yellow binding. And I have it in two different places, which I don't have many of those. And also a book that I've gifted to a lot of people. And one that I'm often told by my team that I need to read again because I've got a lot more than one thing, but I'm trying to dial it down. So, all right, let me give you one last, and then we'll get you out of here. Sam, 40 years old, background in sales and operations, not a big reader, but open to improving. Fourth generation in a 100+ year business, wishes to assume a leadership role in operations. But the family members, and again, you see a theme here, family members feel like they're too valuable in their current role. And some of the older generation still treats them like they're 20 years old, even though they're 40. And what we're seeing is this idea of the integrated life where business is family and family is business is all out of whack and is causing negativity in both the business and outside the business. So also a lot going on there. What books might you recommend?
What's interesting when you've got the person who says, yeah, I don't read much. Sometimes it's hard to recommend a book for them, right? It's hard to recommend a book to them because my belief is always, and I hope people hear it in the answers I've been giving, is I think people read books to solve problems.
Yes.
I don't think, there are some people, and I bet you and I are in this category, and there are other people that do read books simply because they're curious. They're like, hey, what's so-and-so's take on that? I'm really interested in sales. I'm looking for one more take on how that might work.
Yeah.
But I would even argue in those cases, you're solving a problem for yourself.
Yeah.
So when someone says, I don't read very much, sometimes it's hard to recommend a book to them because it sounds to me like maybe reading's not something that's particularly enjoyable. Maybe it's that's not a good format for them. Maybe audiobooks would be better.
Sure.
So I would ask a couple follow-up questions of, is it just you don't like books? Does it take too long? Because here's the thing. I think when someone gets to the age of the person that you're talking about, they may have been exposed to lots of really good ideas. They may have written a whole bunch of books. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll recommend to people, consider getting an executive book summary service. And you may not need all the context of a book anymore. Like you may not need all the stuff. But if you subscribe to something like Executive Book Summaries, Blinkist, there's probably a half a dozen of them out there now.
Right.
And you can read the 6-page version of the book, get the basic things that you need, and then figure out if maybe going back and reading the full book would be helpful. So that would be one piece. And that really goes to what you're telling me about them as a reader.
Yeah. Smart.
I think the second piece that I would just think about that might be helpful for a reader like this is I would probably recommend to them whatever is the most popular book at the time.
Okay.
Because even as a business leader of any sort, you need to be what I call conference room conversational about the important business topics in the space.
Yeah.
So at one time it was Good to Great. Good to Great was probably followed by Blue Ocean Strategy. Blue Ocean Strategy was probably followed by StrengthsFinder. We needed the Gallup piece. And frankly, that book right now is Atomic Habits. Yes. It's the James Clear book. It's selling at rates really no book has seen in the 20 years I've been around book publishing. So I would say, go read Atomic Habits and read it thinking to yourself, there's a lot of other people who have read this book. This may come up in conversation, or maybe there's an opportunity for me to bring it up in conversation, especially if he's stuck in sales right now. You got, know the sports scores, know the books people are reading, know the weather.
Yes.
Like those are like basics of good sales.
Yeah, you're so right.
Or what the weather's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
My point there being, hey, I just got done reading Atomic Habits. Have you read that yet? I've just heard so many people, and suddenly you've got another connection point with people. Mm-hmm. So it could be a tool in your job. It could be, and frankly, I can't believe that with these most popular books that you wouldn't find something that would be helpful. It doesn't exactly get to some of the other issues that I think you talked about there, Bradley, but I'm hoping that helps a touch.
It does. And you took it a totally different way. I'm thinking literally the length of what's the best book of that length. And to your point, I think you're just more thoughtful about the audience than I was. And you're right. And I think sometimes it's people just, maybe the last handful of books that they've been given over the last couple of years, they haven't been good and they haven't enjoyed them and they felt like it was a burden. And then they felt bad when they quit and they put it down and they kind of feel like this imposter syndrome. Maybe they just need like a really good book that has really resonated with an awful lot of people that can help them, maybe just, get that sled in the snow, get those grooves going again. And then maybe that'll open up. So, and I have probably been guilty of being a little too hoity-toity about the Blinkist variety. When I see those pop on Instagram, as someone who loves books and who writes books, I'm like, if somebody took, I kicked my ass for 2.5 years to write this thing and you just boiled it down to 1,500 words, that makes me angry. However, not everyone's like you, Hartman. And your idea of, for some people, this is a good way to get some of the value, and they read that and I'm like, oh my gosh, those points were incredible. Maybe that's a gateway into getting back and reading the full thing. But again, to your point, it's not about me, and there's different strokes for different folks, and any other cliche that might work here.
And here's the last thing I'd say about that one. The reason I suggest that piece is I think when people say they don't like business books, I don't think they're actually saying that they don't like business books. What they don't like is reading the same thing that they've already read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the filler of it. They want the main idea. They want the pieces that can connect to what they already know. And if you have someone who has a base of 20 years of business experience already, you're getting into another space. So I hope that people want to read all the books that we publish. We're actually going to start publishing executive summaries for our own books because we actually think that there's another market there that could be satisfied and could lead into more sales for our book. And I would offer, gosh, are there a couple books of yours that an executive summary could be the entree into either giving the person what they need and them being like, oh my God, thank you so much. And possibly, gosh, you know what? I need more on this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. I'll give you an example. I wrote a book called Good to Excelente. It almost killed me. And it's really taken 6 or 7 years to find its audience. It's way too long. And I literally sent it out as marketing to executives. I'm like, hey, if you like this, you get a feel for this, you're going to like working with us. If not, that's cool. Keep the book. And I say, only read chapter 3. Chapter 3 is what you need to know. It's on the 8 cultural dimensions about leading Hispanics, blah, blah, blah. And several folks have gotten back to me and said, you're 100% right. There's no way I would read this. I read chapter 3. It was like 65 pages. It's perfect. And we've been saying, I'm half tempted just to rip out, the 65 pages and say, here it is, right? And then I started thinking about how to do that well. And I would have to go back into the horror. That was everything that led to me actually getting that book out. But to your point, I was chuckling when you said it. You said, a book is a product, full stop. And I on some level, I'm not an idiot. I know that. But in other areas, I'm an idiot. I have never really thought of that. If you think about what are the other products that we buy and, all that sort of stuff. So I think you're totally right on that.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, hey.
Yes, I am. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, brother. This is a perfect way to end.
It's a perfect way to end. Before we do it, let people know, where can they find more about you? You shared a little bit of context about Bard Press. Let people know if they've gotten value from this and where they can connect with you and learn more about you and what you're doing and how you help people.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is you mentioned it already. I'd probably direct people to the 100 Best Business Books of All Time that I wrote with Jack Covert. It's just a great resource. Yeah. It's just super helpful. And I still think it's the best resource out there. I'm secretly working on a new edition.
Don't tell anyone. Okay.
Don't tell anyone. So I'm working on a new edition of it. So 100 Best is a great place just because it's such a good resource for people.
Yeah.
There's 10,000 books published in the business book market every year. Sorting through that's really hard. This book does a really good job. The second one I would just say is check out bardpress.com. You can sign up for our newsletter, which will get you both information about our upcoming titles. As I mentioned, we only do one book a year. So you're not going to get a ton of emails from me. But when that book comes out, we get really focused on that book. And we think we publish really great stuff that's really helpful to a lot of people. And there's also a blog there. So if you're trying to kind of wade in a little bit to how does business book publishing work? What's more stuff about this stuff that Todd and Bradley have talked about today that I can think about a little bit more? How do I successfully launch a book? I spent a lot of time talking on the blog about what's it like to be a successful author, and pretty particular in the business book space, probably works for nonfiction in general. But I would say 100 best, bardpress.com is going to be the best places to get really great information, whether you're a reader or an author.
Yeah, very good. Now, Bard Press, very close to Brad Press. Different. B-A-R-D Press.
Not the same thing.
There you go. Not the same thing. Not the same thing. Well, hey, thank you very much. This has been a treat for me. I knew I would love, well, we have spoken, but it had been a minute talking about business books, and the work you're doing has been extremely valuable. Folks in our OSR Academy are getting exposed to your Fix to Flexible. I would strongly recommend that. We're also going to make that available in the show notes. So, Todd, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
All right then, friend, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Todd Sattersten. I know that was a little bit longer than normal. However, I love that conversation. He just continued to deliver insights. So hopefully you took at least one or two little nuggets from that and can apply them to your life. Again, in the show notes, or you can simply Google Fixed to Flexible. I think it's a really important and really brief article on how to be smarter about value, price, and positioning. I promise you will not be disappointed with that. And of course, I believe everyone should have on their bookshelves the 100 best business books of all time, what they say, why they matter, and how they can help you. That has been an invaluable resource. It's one of my most gifted books. I think if you're just interested in book reading and books, a big part of the challenge is trying to figure out what the hell to read in the first place. And if you can get that right, then all of a sudden you're going to have more time and you're going to be better at what you do if you can apply the insights that others have lived through and then took so much time and labor to share with you in the form of a written book. As always, we are trying to make this the best podcast you listen to. So if you have ideas or suggestions for improvement, different guests, different topics, different styles, go ahead, email me directly at bradley@bradleyhartmanandco.com. And if you want to see excerpts of my conversation with Mr. Todd Sattersten as we are talking to each other, you can go find that on our YouTube channel at Bradley Hartman and Co. While you're there, go ahead and subscribe. And if you did get value from this conversation with Mr. Todd Sattersten, please leave a quick review. Those mean more to us than you know, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you are listening to this, give us a quick review there. Again, those mean more to us than you know. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Capital One Trade Credit, working with their team and their digital platform to make it easier for customers to buy from you will be one of the smartest decisions you make this year. All right, friends, that's all I've got. Thank you for listening. We're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.